Let's go through these stages, as a matter of fact. We're going to corrupt and then pervert and then warp. Then it's going to be demeaning, meaning somehow somebody is going to be viewed as less than for still wanting to have some sort of propriety or boundaries. Then they're going to be shamed. Then they're going to be what? They're going to be violated. We've transitioned from to blemish to what? What's the goal up there? To tarnish the victim's sense of being wholesome. Now we're going to get into shaming and violating and degrading. You notice what the person who's perping, who's starting to do this, they're up top. They're transitioning across the top from left to right. And this is what they're doing, the stair-step fashion downward. This is what they're doing to the victim. When they move into spoiling, so the goal will be to spoil what? The victim's sense of being desirable. Now we're going to tarnish. So that's why we've got degrade, humiliate, staining, and soiling. You look at the kind of pornography now that is out there. As a matter of fact, Alex Aron, we just recently had her on the program on unmaskingthetransmovement.com. She talked about Latina abuse is a category of pornography. It's all about defiling women. These are Hispanic women. They, some people say that's misogyny. It's not. Yes, of course, it's evil. Okay. And so you keep going. There we go. Defiling, defacing. Now, what are we doing? We're stealing the victim's sense of hope by taking away her innocence, her security, and her peace. And eventually we're going into marring. And now you can see I added to damage. Okay. So they want to mar and they want to damage. And now we're going to shift into genuine psychopathy, which is traumatizing and terrorizing. That destroys the victim's future by forever altering her concept of God. The idea of offending, the Greek word for offending, right? If anybody offends a child, no, that does not have anything to do with theology of young Christians. This has to do with sexual offending. Jesus said, if anybody even thinks of, you'd better, if you're going to end up offending a child, here's what you better do. Something about a millstone and a very deep body of water. The term for millstone was scandalon. We get the English word scandalize. It says you will scandalize a child for the rest of his or her life, and that child will grow into an adult that will continue to stumble. And if you hang a millstone around somebody's neck, a victim, they will continue to trip over what happened because they'll wonder, if there's a loving God, then why didn't he protect them? Him or her. Okay, so the Lord is saying to the would-be perpetrator, if you're going to hang something around somebody's neck, you better go hang it around yourself, your own neck. So it destroys the concept of God, concept of self, others, and life. They'll have a sense of foreboding. They will have a sense of that they are no longer eligible for good things. They will see the glass that's half empty rather than half full. They'll have a difficult time having trust, faith, and hope, and the ability to love and be loved. On my site, SurvivorSupport.net, I cover all of that. The impact of this is very profound. Let me show you from a biblical perspective. Now, those of you that don't come from a biblical perspective, hopefully this will be informative anyways. We're going to go 3,000 years ago as it's coming up now. We're going to go through 3,000 years ago to the book of Proverbs and Psalms. The vast majority of these terms, wait, I'm sorry. I may have gotten, you know what? Let me switch that one. No wonder it was having a hard time. That's a video. There we go. There we go. Okay, the vast majority of these terms are lifted right out of Scripture. The best way to understand these different terms in the book of Psalms and Proverbs are to understand them as categories. Oh, sorry, let me get rid of that one. Okay, so the best way to understand us is we're made in God's image. In what way? In all sorts of ways, but also emotionally. We have a full range of emotions ranging from happy to sad to angry because God has a full range of emotions. The question is, did God have the capacity? Did he have anger, though didn't express it? Did he have the capacity to have anger before Adam and Eve fell, before Satan rebelled? Yes, he did. Right? God didn't change. Nobody had ever seen that. What makes God mad? Injustice. What is injustice? It's crossing somebody's boundaries. It's perpetrating harm. It's trespassing. You have to have something of value to trespass. That's the difference between private property and public property. We are the highest act of God's creation. Therefore, we are to be treated with respect, whether somebody is a Christian or not, or has a relationship with him or not. Also, nature is to be treated with respect. So that's why we don't just willy-nilly destroy nature. So we are stewards of that. But the highest act of his creation is our people. People are to be treated with respect. To the extent that we treat people with respect or not, we will be somewhere on this chart. This is the best way to understand psychopathy, or the old-fashioned term reprobate mind, but this precedes that by 1,000 years. So the way to understand this, and every one of us right now, quite frankly, are on this chart. Up on the left, the best way to understand this is that is the straight and narrow. Remember my other little chart? There we go. What we're going to look at is this. The blue part, and that rainbow of colors would be where the positive one is. I tried to draw a little flat area. Okay. We're going to call that the path of life. God wants us on the straight and narrow, and he's going to then develop us for the rest of our lives towards genuine character growth that has his character traits. So we call that, especially since psychopathy has to do with the mind, God wants to develop his mind, or in us, or if somebody comes from a Christian perspective, you've heard the term the mind of Christ. What is the mind of Christ all about? How God sees things, especially people. God cares very much about people. So I am as spiritual, and I am as close to him, and I am as on the path of life as I treat other people the way he would want me to. To the extent that I don't, I'm off the path. Now the snowball-like process starts. Why am I even talking about this? Because this is how somebody ends up becoming a sexual psychopath. What do? They get off the straight and narrow, which is on the blue, and it starts. What is it? Ego. And it will start going through various categories. It will have everything to do with the degree of impact, and really from left to right, the degree of negative impact that we have on someone. The greater the greater extent to which that I am hurting someone, I am moving from left to right. And the question is, how does God feel about it? Those are the upper categories there. So the more selfish I become, the more descending and to the right I become. So if I become, now I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to drop down to see the word defiler that's way down at the very bottom right. Just under the defiler is the sadistic. Now we're going to move up just for a moment. I'm going to go straight up. We've got the calculating, the cruel. Now, most people that go to church don't understand. Look at the very next word, by the way. Slander. Do you know what the Greek word for slander is? Diabolos. I'm no more like Satan than when I am doing soul murder and ruining somebody's reputation. People need to be very careful. Look what category you are under. If you slander someone, you're eligible for God's destruction. Okay, so just heads up. If go straight down then from there to the third to the last silver word, the vile. If you are preying upon someone sexually, guess where you are? Guess how God feels about you? That's why Jesus talked about a big stone and a big body of water. Where would sexual offenses be? Let me see if I can find it right here. Now, this is my own, right? If you don't agree with this, tell you what, make your own chart and reach out to me and we'll talk about it. Okay. I challenge everybody, if this doesn't really fit for you, okay, do a word study. And you figure out what to do with these categories, because these are very consistent. Whenever you see these below the line, you will always see that there's a corresponding response and perspective from God toward that kind of person and what they're eligible for. And by the way, since right in the middle, see the word oppression? That's different than persecution. The persecution has to do with, I want the person, if I'm a persecutor, I want you to shut your mouth because I don't want to hear it. And if you shut your mouth, I'll stop hurting you. Oppression is about evil. Those are two very different things. Blessed are those who are persecuted. That's not oppression. Oppression is evil. When I take knapsacks and I place it on someone else, I weigh them down. What is the knapsack? My responsibility to do what is right, just, and fair. When I start to get to a point where I am comfortable being oppressive, see the word oppression? Goes straight up. What's right in the middle there? The word fool. My contention is this. A fool has crossed the point of no return. They're beyond hope. John, how can you say that? Okay. They've lost the desire to ever be any other way than they are. How can I say that? Well, there's a verse that says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no, doesn't say he said it with his mouth, but if you get to a point where you don't believe you're ever going to be held accountable, what is there ever to cause you to hang a left and go back up to the straight and narrow? You don't care anymore. So by the time somebody's a fool, I submit to you in Matthew 7, they're a pig and a dog. They are equivalent to a reprobate mind, and they are beyond hope. Are we supposed to be around someone who is hell-bent? No. But how many churches believe you keep hanging in there with everyone? Really? That's not what the Lord says. Where should you, and we should match. As a matter of fact, church discipline should match this. So is there a point at which somebody is put out of the church, so to speak? Or is there some point in time where Mr. and Mrs. spouse that you should separate? 100%. If someone becomes a fool, you are to separate from them. So do not keep hanging in there, because that is not love. That is actually based in fear, and you will simply facilitate harm. And there's a lot of men that are into porn, and wives are told they need to just keep hanging in there. That is not true. You need to separate at the very least within about 6 months if the guy doesn't turn around. If you don't like that, then come up with your own plan. Okay, now, how does a man descend down to, so the sex offenses, I believe, would be right in there. Okay, remember where fool was? Right about where the sexual manipulator starts. So when you're dealing with men that sexually offend, this is how you need to see them. They didn't just slip. They weren't taken in a fall. They didn't just, they weren't overtaken. They weren't blindsided by sin. Satan didn't get the best of him. They didn't just have a bad day or into depression. They didn't just have low self-esteem. They weren't reenacting their own abuse. What were they doing? They're willful. This is deviance. Deviance is the issue. But if you want to fast track the process downward, you add porn and then the internet. And you will supercharge the process. Over on the floating, the up right there, judicially abandoned by God. They're given over. That's what that word means. They're judicially abandoned to a self-imposed, non-functioning, fixed, and depraved mind. The further they go down, they are beyond hope. Why? They've lost the desire to be any other way than they are. So by the time you get it between his wrath and his vengeance, it's over. They'll talk a good game. As a matter of fact, the most convincing ones are the ones on the right. Those are the ones that will come to church. That's why look at the term I have down there, the sexually violent child predator. Those are the ones that are going to be finding positions as mandated reporters, such as teachers, school administrators. They're not only going to be politicians, but they're going to be psychologists. They're going to go into the mental health field. They're going to go into child welfare. They're going to run orphanages. They're going to be social workers. They're going to be physicians that deal with who? The most vulnerable and those that are gender confused. And they will be the ones to set kids up for financial and sexual predation. Okay, so you can see the different terms. I'll go through them quickly. You've got the sexual manipulator, perverse sexual appetites, unnatural sexual affections. These terms really come out of scripture now that I'm reading these again. The sexual defrauder, you see the reference there, sexually twisted, sexually deviant, the sexually depraved, the sexual thief comes to steal and destroy. The sexually calculating, okay, I've added some of these. There it is, SVP, sexual violent predator, the sadistic, the defiler, and the very worst one is what? Sexually, the child predator. Now, sexually violent predator does not mean they beat the tar out of the kid. What it means is they love inflicting trauma. What does trauma look like? Very subtle at times. A cult leader traumatizes someone where now what is good, bad, right, wrong, up, down is all flip-flopped. The Stockholm syndrome is the result of trauma, where the victim aligns with the aggressor. So it is evil to draw a child away from his or her family. And what are the stair-step-like process downward? Here's another chart that'll show you by the time somebody gets down, what's happening in his or her character. So the progression of deviance and psychopathy. Given these levels, of course, they've gotten off the straight and narrow. So for those who wrestle with pornography, I would put that in level 1 and also really level 1. This is what we would call taken in a fall. David was at level 1 and then he moved into level 2. Okay, now, of course, they didn't have pornography back then, but David became selfish. As a matter of fact, the servant, when David said, get her for me, he's saying, hello, that's Uriah the Hittite's wife. He says, get her for me. So he had moved. He was inadvertent when he saw her, but then what did he do? So really, he was already in that selfish mode, and he inadvertently saw that. So if a selfish person inadvertently sees something, you will find out what category they're at. Okay, so for those men, since I'm focusing on men for a moment, for a man to stumble into pornography, there is grace. But you need, if I'm talking to you, mister, you need to get some help. I would recommend go on SurvivorSupport.net under the Insights tab to porn and dark deviance so you get healthy fear of what can happen. You can see they're going to move from selfish. They're already getting into pornography now. And now steady diet of porn. That's going to put them in level 3, moving to level 4, calloused and indifferent. You look at how porn progresses into very deviant stuff. You're already not caring about the person. And BDSM or kink is what? If you can watch a man put his hand on a woman's throat, you're already callous and indifferent. But you have moved into willful and purposeful, especially what? You are willfully and purposely violating your conscience. You're becoming different now. And deviance is you no longer, for a man, he no longer gets an erection over physical appearance and attraction. It's now he is getting off on harming someone. Silence my phone here. So twisted and dark, you look at how that progresses, and this is the stuff we see online. And now the twisting effect, now morally inverted. What used to be right, wrong, good, bad is certainly inverted. And this is where the man continues to descend downward into not just power and control, but now harming. And we're going to start to get bestiality in at this level. By the time a man is into child porn, he's already been into bestiality and morally twisted. And then what's that word? Look at level 8, given over. There's the reprobate mind. He's not coming back. Do not feel sorry for a reprobate mind. Does God feel sorry for him? Well, let's go back. Does God feel sorry for the reprobate mind? Look at about the twisted and the wicked and the vile. Let's go straight up. Do not have sympathy on those that God does not have sympathy on. You match your response, and same thing with churches. Trust me, if somebody has offended a child, they're eligible for what aspect of God's character? Far right. Do not, as a church, have sympathy on those that God has held over for destruction. Because you're going to send a message to who? To the perp. He's gotten away with it, so you become a fellow enabler. And what message, and why is God angry? He's angry on behalf of the survivor. You will insult, you insult God's justice, and you do double harm to the survivors that are in churches if you say, we're going to welcome back the lost sheep. And if you can't discern who the lost sheep is, I'm going to help you with this chart. Okay, there's 8 categories of offenders based upon my 14 years of experience working with sex offenders. But this came out of my time working on psych staff doing sex offender treatment in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Move from left to right. The best way to understand sex offenders is not through a cognitive behavioral approach. I have yet to meet someone, I probably met 2, but they were on the special units dealing with those that had real issues with their brains. To take a cognitive behavioral approach with a man who knew the difference between right and wrong, in a way, is silly. Why? Because what are you going to teach him? It's not that he didn't know the difference, he didn't care. So he's got to get his heart back. How do you do that? Quite frankly, you scared the daylights out of him. How do you do that? You reintroduce a spiritual perspective that someday is payday someday. That's the only hope. So you have to bring back, it's like the 12 steps. Steps 1 through 3 basically says there is a God, you're not him. And step 4 is step 3 is he really is taking notes. Step 4 is you better do a searching and fearless moral inventory, meaning that's really Matthew chapter 5. If you're at the altar presenting your gift and you suddenly remember what? That you were really hurtful. You better leave your gift at the altar and go take care of business. So these are the different categories, and you will see these categories have certain kinds of pornography in each. The gateway drug used to be Playboy, and Ted Bundy started with Playboy. It starts over on the left. You will see that those will be the misdemeanor sexual offenses. We call those the young and the dumb because that's typically the 19 or 20-year-old that we would have in group. What happened, instead of realizing he graduated from high school and he needs to be hanging out with college students, what does he do? He goes back, he's developmentally young and delayed. And so his friends are what? Seniors. Well, he's now graduated and they have a party. I'm not justifying any of this, right? But they have a party and there's a 17-year-old there. And she's the daughter of the judge. And he's 19 or 20. And so what do you think is going to happen? He can end up in the same kind of group as someone that has truly violated women in the worst kind of way and kids. Okay, now, depending upon high or low intensity, but it's really eye-opening for those young men because some of those guys had their sisters molested and they can end up in a group by the same kind of guy that molested their sister, maybe a father or a stepfather. So the challenge is in sex offender treatment to make sure 3/4 of the guys don't beat the tar out of the other pedophiles. Okay, moving from left to right, you then have the low-level felony sex offender. What is his issue? Selfishness and idiotic. Still the young and the dumb, it's selfish. Why do we say idiotic? Because this is a guy like, hello, McFly, no, you can't take advantage of someone even if she said, yes, I'm okay with a hookup. Because in the morning, you leave yourself open to what? Or let's say you go visit a prostitute. and she starts to steal your wallet while she's giving you favors, and you get angry. I had these kind of situations. Then he beats the tar out of her, and now he's in for both assault and battery and a sex offense. So we would call that the selfish and idiotic, or I call that. But now we're moving into the deviance, though. What's going on in his heart? Now, again, the two left categories are not anything to sneeze about, meaning we take all of it seriously. But you're going to see the degree of victim impact move from more and more profound as we move to the right. So sexual deviance, that's the perverted and proud. There's the condition of the heart. Okay, and pride goes before a fall, and pride is ego, and ego perpetrates selfishness. Then we move to the sexual perpetrator. By this time, now somebody's getting arrested. Can you end up going, can you commit, as a matter of fact, can you commit any of these and not be arrested? Smarter you are. Okay, but up until, strangely enough, it may not be until category 4. Now, again, these are John Uhler's categories, right? As far as the categories I discerned and have discerned over the 14 years now working with guys. But it is possible for the first offense now that's going to send somebody upstate is category 4. Okay. But you can have all of these sitting in one group. Manipulative, conniving, and scheming. So that's the perpetrator. Notice the words: conniving and scheming, manipulative. What are they doing with their knapsacks? They're dumping it on someone else. This is a guy that knows how to groom really well. The first 3 categories, they don't groom very well. But now you're starting to develop the art of deception. Now you got sexual predators: deceitful, calculating, and callous. Pedophiles: sick, twisted, and depraved. Sexually violent predators: coercive, cold-hearted, and forcible. And now SVPs that target kids, or the wolf in sheep's clothing. They're malevolent, devious, dark, and diabolical. They've harmonized with darkness. And I want people to understand that the further a man descends into sexual deviance, and you'll see this with the categories of porn, that they develop a malevolence toward women. How does somebody progress into sexual deviance? This also comes from my work in prison. It starts from left to right. We're going to now see how somebody becomes a sexual psychopath. It starts with, so I want to caution men. There are going to be some men that watch this, and pastors, if you're watching this, if you're doing this, but you need to be aware there are men in your church that are somewhere on this chart. A lot of men, unfortunately. Okay, so over on the left, prolonged attraction and emotional pull. That is somebody that is now dabbling in porn on the internet. We would even say that's David and Bathsheba before Bathsheba. What happens? As a matter of fact, this would be David as well. Leaving oneself open to temptation. So these 2 categories are very redeemable. Then what happens? Actively allowing sexually provocative or stimulating material. Okay, and this is still a lot of men in churches right now. Okay, for example, Sports Illustrated, Swimsuit Edition, Victoria's Secret catalog, explicit romance novels. Women don't get a pass. But if you see, okay, so 50 Shades of Grey, this kind of stuff. Okay. And unfortunately, that's in society. People now yawn at these 3 kind of things. And now it's going to progress. Seeking out sexually stimulating material. Now we've gone from inadvertent, and we're trying to resist, to all of a sudden what's happened now, the guy's taking his brakes off. And now, can you kind of see that shift? He's been trying to resist temptation. He's got on the left, he still sort of has a firewall. Then he has no firewall. He's not acting in wisdom or walking in wisdom. And now he's dabbling in 3rd category. Now what's he's doing? Now it has hooked him. This is a book of James where it says, sin once conceived. It's like a fish. It's that fly in the Venus flytrap. It's the little fish nibbling at the sea anemone. It's the gazelle that has, these are the first couple of categories, and now it's drinking deeply of poisoned water when there's something in that water. It's the crocodile now that's slowly moving up to the gazelle, who has now become comfortable. it's going to become lunch. So now the guy is seeking out graphic sexually material, the sexually stimulating and explicit material. But this is now, people pass this in a day, virtually, sadly. So Hustler and Penthouse. So it used to be, there you go, seeking out sexually stimulating material. We would call that the soft core. But now, I mean, what I would categorize this is the halftime show for the NFL, Super Bowl halftime show. Absolutely. J-Lo, what she was doing, we've got at least category 4 here. If not moving into, right? How many young men have been triggered by NFL, by Super Bowl halftime shows? Okay, so when we move to seeking out graphic, sexually stimulating, and explicit material, okay, so now we're moving to I've got my camera right in the way, sexually exploitive or degrading. This is the BDSM stuff, 50 Shades of Grey. By the time somebody's into this, look at the categories he's already descended through. Computer stimulated alter egos. These are the little games. And now what you're going to see online, these are the furries. These are, when you go online and you start speaking about the dangers of porn, the harm of porn, the dangers of furries for minors, what you're going to see is you're going to get all sorts of comments. You're going to get lambasted by who? Adults that hide 100% of their identity, who have little characters for their little icons. And on a lot of their pages, you're going to see that they have personas and fursonas. Okay, so they have these little alter egos, animal characters, anime, and they're going to have photographs, especially deviant anime porn. And these are the ones that, again, my contention is this. Somebody at a very dark level will show them. It's like the submarine that's coming to the surface. Remember the chart that I showed? I'm going to bring this back up. We could have our guy on the right here that's a user and a manipulator. He's actually, we could say, potentially, because the person on the left doesn't know the number this guy is at, the guy on the right. He could be a -10. He could be super pig. Okay, so you don't know who you're dealing with. So somebody that has all of this, as far as right in the middle, computer simulated alter ego, could very well be on the far right. But that's all they're showing. Why? To lure and attract. We call that grooming.